Oh, he's a pretty good all-around player.
He was unstoppable early.
Well, I just think it would have been an all-star.
The tragic truth about Reggie Lewis is that his death did not come out of nowhere. On April 29, 1993, at the Boston Garden, the Celtics captain fell face-first onto the court during Game 1 of the playoffs against the Charlotte Hornets. He had just scored 17 points in only 13 minutes. No one in that building knew it, but they were watching the last NBA game Reggie Lewis would ever play. Before we go further, you should know who this man really was. Reggie was Boston's captain. He was trusted with the future of one of the most famous teams in basketball. His story is bigger than the scary headlines about his death. As we uncover what really happened, tap the hype button and give this video some hype so more fans can remember the player behind the headlines. Two very different groups of doctors would soon look at his heart. One group said it was close to killing him already. Another doctor said the heart looked normal. Less than 3 months after that fall in Boston Garden, Reggie Lewis was gone. To understand how that happened, we have to go back to the beginning. This is not a simple story with one clear villain. It is a story about a talented young man, a handful of respected doctors who disagreed with each other, and a franchise desperate to believe the best possible outcome. Every step of what follows deserves to be told carefully, and every disputed claim deserves to be treated fairly, because Reggie Lewis cannot speak for himself anymore. The people who loved him are still trying to protect the memory of who he really was, long after the headlines faded. Keep his talent in mind as we walk through what happened next, because it is easy to lose sight of the player once the medical questions and the rumors take over the conversation. To understand why so many people wanted Reggie to survive this and keep playing, you need to know what kind of player he was. Reggie Lewis grew up to become one of the best scorers Northeastern University ever had. He is still the school's all-time leading scorer with 2,708 points. Think about that number for a second. Thousands of players have worn a Northeastern jersey, and none of them scored more points than Reggie Lewis. He was not just a scorer either. He was known as a tough, smart defender. In one single game, he managed to block Michael Jordan 4 times. Jordan was already becoming the best player in the world, and Reggie still found a way to stop him. Not once, but 4 separate times in the same game. That kind of defense takes timing, courage, and total focus. When the Celtics drafted him, he joined a team built around 3 legends: Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, and Robert Parrish. Those 3 men had won championships together for years. But by the early 1990s, they were getting older. Their bodies were breaking down. The Celtics needed a new face for the future, someone who could carry the team once the old legend stepped aside. That someone became Reggie Lewis. The Celtics made him team captain. That is not a small thing in professional sports. A captain is trusted to lead, to set the tone in the locker room, and to represent the whole organization. Fans in Boston believed Reggie was the bridge between one golden era and the next one. Executives believed it too. His contract reflected that belief, worth millions of guaranteed dollars, because the team expected him to be a star for many years to come. So when we talk about Reggie Lewis, we are not just talking about a man with a heart problem. We are talking about a person who carried the hopes of an entire franchise on his shoulders at only 27 years old. That is important to remember because it explains why everyone around him, doctors, team officials, even Reggie himself, wanted so badly to find an answer that let him keep playing. Nobody wanted to hear that his career, and maybe his life, was in danger. And in April of 1993, his body sent the clearest warning yet that something was seriously wrong. Before that warning arrived, though, it is worth sitting with what Boston actually had in Reggie Lewis. He was not a flashy player chasing highlights. He was steady, disciplined, and relentless on both ends of the floor. Coaches trusted him because he did the difficult, quiet work that wins playoff games, boxing out bigger players, fighting through screens, and closing out defensive possessions when the crowd noise made it hard to even hear the play calls. Teammates respected him because he never acted like he was bigger than the team, even after becoming its captain. That kind of respect is not handed out easily in professional sports. It is earned game by game, season by season. By 1993, Reggie had spent years earning exactly that kind of respect, from teammates, from coaches, and from an entire city that had grown used to watching champions play at the Boston Garden. Let's go back to April 29th, 1993, the night everything changed. It was Game 1 of the Eastern Conference playoffs. The Celtics were facing the Charlotte Hornets. Boston Garden was loud, hot, and packed with fans who believed their team had a real shot at another deep playoff run. Reggie Lewis was playing well. He was quick, sharp, and confident, scoring points and doing what he always did for this team. Then, without much warning, he collapsed face first onto the hardwood floor. For a moment, the whole arena went quiet. Players from both teams stood frozen. Reggie later told the team's medical staff that he had felt dizzy and had a brief blackout. He mentioned something small, that the grapefruit juice he drank before the game had tasted unusually bitter. It sounds like a strange detail to build a diagnosis around, but that is exactly what happened next. The team doctor at the time was Dr. Arnold Scheller. Scheller was skilled, but he was an orthopedic specialist, meaning his real expertise was in bones and joints, not hearts. Focusing on the bitter juice and the fact that Boston Garden had no air conditioning that night, the medical staff cleared Reggie to go back out and play the second half. It is easy to look back now and feel frustrated by that decision. But at the time, it may have felt like the simplest explanation. Heat, dehydration, and an odd-tasting drink. Nobody wanted to believe it was something more serious. Almost as soon as Reggie stepped back onto the court, teammates noticed something was wrong. His legs looked shaky and weak, like they could not hold his weight properly. Coaches pulled him out for good. That night was not just one strange moment in a basketball game. It was a major warning sign, arriving 3 full months before Reggie Lewis would die. His body had already tried to tell everyone that something dangerous was happening inside his chest. The people around him just did not fully understand the message yet. In the hours and days that followed, doctors realized this could not be explained away by juice or humidity. Reggie needed real testing from real heart specialists. He was admitted to New England Baptist Hospital, and a much larger group of doctors was about to get involved. Looking back at that night now, it is tempting to be angry at the early explanation. Bitter grapefruit juice and a hot arena do sound like a strange way to explain a professional athlete collapsing face first onto a basketball court. But it is worth remembering that heart problems in young, extremely fit athletes are rare and easy to miss, even for good doctors. Reggie did not look sick. He looked like one of the strongest, most conditioned men in the entire league. That is part of what made this so dangerous. His body had been hiding a serious problem behind years of elite performance, and the very first response to his collapse reflected how unexpected that problem truly was. At New England Baptist Hospital, Dr. Scheller knew this problem was bigger than he could handle alone, so he brought together 12 of the region's most respected heart doctors. Reporters at the time nicknamed this group the Cardiology Dream Team. One of the doctors on this panel was Dr. Thomas Grayboys, a well-known and highly trusted cardiologist in Boston. Together, these 12 specialists ran Reggie through a huge number of tests, checking every part of how his heart worked. What they found was frightening. They diagnosed him with something called focal cardiomyopathy. In simple words, that means one specific area of his heart muscle had damage or weakness. They also found ventricular tachycardia. That means a very fast and dangerous heartbeat, one that can suddenly turn deadly. Put together, these 12 doctors believed Reggie's collapse in that playoff game had come frighteningly close to killing him already. They did not think this was a small issue that would fade with rest. They believed continuing to play professional basketball could genuinely end his life. Their recommendation was clear and serious. Reggie needed to stop playing basketball permanently. They even discussed whether he needed a small device called a defibrillator placed inside his chest, a device that can shock a dangerous heartbeat back to normal if it happens again. Imagine hearing that news at 27 years old. Basketball was not just Reggie's job. It was the thing that had shaped his entire life, from childhood through college and into the pros. It was tied to his identity, his family's future, and the promises made to an entire city. A diagnosis like this did not just threaten his career. It threatened to take away the only life he had ever known. So Reggie wanted another opinion. He wanted someone to tell him there was still hope. On the night of May 2nd, 1993, something unusual happened. Instead of staying at New England Baptist to continue treatment, Reggie checked himself out in the middle of the night. He did not leave in a normal ambulance. He left in a hospital security van, headed for a different hospital across the city. It was an unusual, almost secretive way to leave. But looking at it fairly, it was also the choice of a frightened young man who had just been told his career, and maybe his life might be over. He was not trying to hide from the truth. He was searching for a different answer, one that might let him keep the life he had built. That search led him straight to Brigham and Women's Hospital and to a doctor whose opinion would soon change everything. It helps to picture the pressure on everyone involved at this exact moment. Reggie's wife, Donna, later explained that they chose Brigham and Women's partly because she had once worked there and trusted the people inside it. This was not a reckless decision made without thought. It was the decision of a young couple trying to find somewhere they could trust, at the most frightening moment of their lives together. They were not looking to avoid the truth. They were looking for anyone who could offer a different version of it, one that did not end with Reggie's career, and possibly his identity, over at 27 years old. At Brigham and Women's Hospital, Reggie was placed under the care of Dr. Gilbert Mudge, the head of clinical cardiology there. Mudge ran his own set of tests. On May 10, 1993, he stood in front of reporters and cameras and delivered a very different message. He said Reggie had a normal athlete's heart, with normal function. He rejected the cardiomyopathy diagnosis from the 12-doctor panel completely. Instead, Mudge diagnosed something called neurocardiogenic syncope. In simple words, that means fainting caused by a sudden drop in blood pressure or heart rate, not permanent damage to the heart muscle itself. Mudge's treatment plan involved beta blockers, medicine that slows and steadies the heart rate, along with salt tablets. Publicly, he expressed real hope that Reggie could return to professional basketball. You can imagine what this meant to Reggie, to his wife, to the Celtics organization, and to fans across Boston. After being told his career and life were in serious danger, here was a respected doctor from a major hospital saying the opposite, that his heart was fine and that he could play again. It is easy looking back to want a simple villain in this story, but that misses the real emotional weight of what happened. This was not a clear case of one honest doctor against one careless doctor. It was a genuine, painful split between a frightening diagnosis that ended a dream and a hopeful diagnosis that kept the dream alive. Both answers came from serious, trained medical professionals. There was one complication with Mudge's treatment. Beta blockers slow the heart down, which can make it much harder to perform at a professional athletic level. Because of this, Reggie's dosage was later reduced, an adjustment made to help him function better on the court. Still, the bigger question remained unanswered. Two respected medical teams had looked at the same heart and reached almost opposite conclusions. One said his life was at serious risk. The other said he was healthy enough to return to elite competition. Reggie, understandably, wanted to be certain before trusting either side completely. So he sought out a third opinion. One more chance to find real clarity. This time all the way across the country in California. Before we follow him there, it is worth pausing on just how rare this situation was. Very few patients ever go through 3 separate, serious cardiac evaluations in the space of a few months. Most people trust the first serious diagnosis they receive. Reggie's situation was different because the stakes were so enormous. His career, his identity, and the financial future of his family were all tied up in whichever diagnosis turned out to be correct. That is part of why this case became so complicated later on. Reggie was not simply a patient making a private medical decision. He was a public figure whose health had become a matter of intense interest to his team, to reporters, and eventually to the public at large. It also helps to remember that patients often trust the doctor who gives them the outcome they are hoping for, especially when the alternative feels unbearable. That is a very human reaction, not a foolish one. Reggie was not choosing between a lie and the truth. He was choosing between two honestly held medical opinions, formed by qualified doctors looking at the exact same heart. Anyone in his position at 27, with a career and an identity on the line, might have leaned toward the answer that let them keep living the life they had built. That does not make the choice reckless. It makes it deeply, painfully human. In June of 1993, Reggie traveled to St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica, California, to be seen by a team led by Dr. Nicholas Diaco. This third evaluation did not simply side with one earlier diagnosis over the other. Instead, Diaco's team found a combination of both problems. They identified a real structural issue with his heart, along with the fainting condition Mudge had described. Their advice was cautious. They recommended continuous monitoring of his heart, and they warned against unmonitored, unsupervised physical effort. In plain terms, 3 separate medical teams had now looked closely at Reggie Lewis, and not one of them said his condition was something to fully ignore. Despite this string of warnings, Reggie resumed light workouts. He was trying to ease his way back toward the game he loved, carefully, or so it seemed. On July 27, 1993, Reggie Lewis was shooting baskets at Brandeis University, doing something as simple and familiar as practicing jump shots alone in a gym. During that workout, he collapsed. This time, there would be no third opinion, no press conference, no hopeful diagnosis to hold on to. Attempts to revive him did not succeed. He was taken to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. Reggie Lewis was only 27 years old, a player who had blocked Michael Jordan 4 times in one game, who had led his university in scoring, who had been named captain of the Boston Celtics, was suddenly gone during an ordinary afternoon of practice. The news stunned Boston and the entire basketball world, but his death did not end the story. In many ways, it was only the beginning of a new and painful question: what had actually caused the damage inside his heart? Before we get to that question, take a moment to sit with what had just happened. A 27-year-old man, one of the fittest athletes in the entire NBA, had gone through 3 separate rounds of serious cardiac evaluation, had followed medical advice as best he understood it, and had still died during an ordinary afternoon of shooting free throws by himself. There was nothing dramatic or reckless about that final workout. It was simple, familiar, and quiet, which somehow made the loss feel even harder to accept. For his family, for his teammates, and for an entire city. The shock was not just that Reggie Lewis had died. It was that it had happened after everyone thought the danger might finally be behind him. The examination of Reggie's body was carried out by Dr. Stanton Kessler, the Associate Chief Medical Examiner of Massachusetts. Kessler's official finding was that Reggie's heart was enlarged and heavily scarred. He attributed this damage to adenovirus type 2, a common virus, one that often causes nothing more serious than a cold. According to Kessler, this common virus had triggered myocarditis, meaning swelling or damage in the heart muscle, often linked to an infection. He explained that the active infection itself had healed by the time of Reggie's death, but the scars it left behind never went away. Those scars, Kessler said, made Reggie vulnerable to a sudden, deadly, abnormal heartbeat, the kind that can stop a heart without warning. For a while, this became the official, natural explanation for his death. But not everyone agreed. Some outside pathologists looked at the amount and pattern of scarring on Reggie's heart and found it unusual for a simple healed virus. Dr. John Fallon and Dr. Jeffrey Isner, 2 respected medical experts, had assisted or consulted during parts of the examination process. Fallon later stated that the damage he observed could fit a pattern consistent with chronic cocaine exposure. That is a very different explanation from a common virus. State officials pushed back on that account. They disputed whether such concerns had ever been formally raised during the actual autopsy process itself. Investigators were eventually asked to look into these conflicting versions of events to try to understand who said what and when. This is where the story becomes genuinely difficult and where we have to be careful and fair. It would be easy to hear the word cocaine and assume the entire mystery is solved. But that is not accurate, and it is not fair to Reggie or his family. Saying that heart damage looks consistent with cocaine exposure is not the same as proving that cocaine caused his death. Consistent with is not the same as caused by. Doctors can observe a pattern that fits several different explanations without being able to prove which explanation is the true one. That distinction matters enormously here, because in the years that followed, allegations about drug use would come to overshadow almost everything else about Reggie Lewis, his talent, his leadership, and the genuine medical uncertainty surrounding his heart. It is worth remembering, too, that disagreements between pathologists are not unusual in complicated cases like this one. Reading scar tissue on a damaged heart is not always a simple, obvious task with one correct answer. Different experts looking at the very same tissue can reasonably interpret what they see in different ways. That does not automatically mean anyone was lying or hiding something on purpose. Sometimes it simply means medicine, even at its best, cannot always give families the one clean, certain answer they are desperately hoping for. Consider how the malpractice trial years later handled this exact question. Even Dr. Mudge's own hired expert in cardiac pathology could only go as far as saying the tissue changes were consistent with cocaine exposure. That expert never stood behind the stronger claim that cocaine had actually caused Reggie's fatal arrhythmia. If the doctor's own expert witness would not make that leap, it should give any of us real pause before repeating the stronger, more dramatic version of the claim as though it were an established fact. The honest answer is messier than either extreme version people wanted to believe. Reggie's family understood this distinction better than most of the public did, which is exactly why they pushed back so hard against the simpler headlines. Their fight for a fair, careful record was not a small thing. Let's walk through the disputed claims carefully, because none of them were ever proven as the cause of Reggie's death. even though they shaped the public conversation for years. During his very first hospital stay in April of 1993, Reggie reportedly refused a voluntary drug test. His agent at the time, Jerome Stanley, later confirmed that this refusal happened. According to that account, Reggie felt the medical staff was treating him like a liar instead of focusing on his heart, and that frustration is why he refused the test. His family strongly denied that cocaine had anything to do with his death. His mother argued that the real issue was always a serious heart defect, not drug use. Donna Harris Lewis, his widow, described the intense focus on drugs as unfair, and she publicly connected it to a pattern of racial bias and how black athletes were treated. During one courtroom moment, she became visibly upset, saying she felt like all anyone wanted to talk about was drugs, and asking whether those same questions would ever have been asked about a white superstar like Larry Bird. Later, Dr. Mudge testified that during a July 12 appointment, 15 days before Reggie died, Reggie admitted to him that he had used cocaine in the past, though he said he had since stopped. This alleged admission was never written down in Reggie's medical chart. Mudge did not significantly change the treatment plan afterward. Reggie's widow called this account a later invention, something added to defend Mudge once the malpractice case began. We cannot say for certain which version is true. What we can say is that if a confession like that truly happened, the lack of documentation and lack of any change in treatment raises real questions either way. Separately, a former Northeastern University official said that Reggie and a teammate had tested positive for cocaine before the 1987 NCAA tournament. A retest a few days later reportedly came back negative, allowing both players to compete. The original physical testing records from that time no longer exist. The team doctor at Northeastern later said he had thrown those records away in 1994. Because of that, nobody today can independently check what those original tests actually showed. A former teammate named Derek Lewis, who was not related to Reggie despite sharing a last name, made public claims that he and Reggie had used cocaine together on several occasions. Later, Derek Lewis withdrew or changed important parts of that story. He said he had received threats after speaking out. Around that same time, the Wall Street Journal paid for him to stay in a hotel for a few nights, describing it as a security arrangement. Some critics questioned whether that payment may have affected the reliability of his account in either direction. A Northeastern classmate named Wayne Brown gave a sworn deposition stating that he had used cocaine with Reggie during their college years. Every single one of these claims needs to be understood the same way. They are serious. They deserve to be taken seriously. But not one of them proves what actually caused Reggie Lewis's heart to fail on that July afternoon. The allegations created real, painful questions for his family and for the public. They did not settle the medical mystery. The official cause of death remained heart damage linked to a healed virus. The claims about cocaine were disputed, incomplete, and in some cases based on evidence that was destroyed, altered, or withdrawn before it could be independently checked. Reggie Lewis should not be defined by claims that were never fully settled, one way or the other. It is worth stepping back here and asking a simple question. Why did these allegations spread so widely and last for so many years when none of them were ever proven in court or through hard scientific evidence? Part of the answer is that Reggie was already famous, and fame turns private medical questions into public entertainment. Part of the answer is that his death came only a few years after another young Celtics star, Len Bias, had died from a cocaine overdose, which made journalists and fans quicker to assume a similar explanation, fairly or not. And part of the answer is that once a rumor like this starts circulating around a beloved public figure, it becomes very difficult to fully put it to rest, even when the actual evidence remains incomplete, contested, and unresolved. To understand why this story got so complicated, it helps to look at the money involved and the pressure that money created. Reggie had a guaranteed contract with the Celtics, with an estimated remaining value of around $15 million. If a player died from natural causes while under contract, the team was obligated to pay that remaining value to his estate. To help cover a loss like that, the Celtics held a corporate life insurance policy. Reggie also held his own personal life insurance policy, worth about $2 million, separate from the team's coverage. Insurance policies like these often include exclusions for illegal drug use or for false statements made on the original application. If it had been legally established that Reggie used cocaine and had not disclosed that on his insurance paperwork, those exclusions could have given the insurance companies grounds to refuse payment entirely. That would have shifted a heavy financial burden onto other parties, and it would have changed how much money Reggie's family ultimately received. So a finding of drug use was never just a medical question. It carried real financial consequences for the team, for the insurance companies, and for Reggie's own family. The Celtics organization publicly and strongly pushed back against the drug allegations. They reportedly considered a major lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal over its reporting. It also helps to understand how drug testing worked in the NBA at that time. Under the league's rules, veteran players were not subject to random drug testing. A team could only request a test if it first established what was called probable cause, reviewed by an independent league-appointed medical expert. Because the Celtics treated Reggie's early symptoms as an orthopedic or general cardiac issue rather than a drug-related issue, that formal process was never triggered. When Reggie declined the voluntary test during his first hospital stay, the organization did not push the matter further. One reporter who covered the team at the time described this attitude in a simple phrase that what they did not know could not hurt them. None of this proves a deliberate cover-up. It does help explain why every medical decision in Reggie's case carried consequences that reached far beyond his own health. He was not only a patient in a hospital bed, he was also a multi-million-dollar contract, an insurance liability, a team captain, and a symbol of hope for an entire city, all at the very same time. That combination, patient, athlete, contract, and symbol, is part of why this case never became a simple medical story. Every decision touched more than one life and more than one balance sheet. It is not fair to say money alone drove every choice that was made, but it is fair to say that money made honesty harder for almost everyone involved. And that pressure like that rarely helps a sick person get the clearest, most careful care possible. None of these financial facts are secret conspiracies on their own. They are simply the ordinary business realities that sit quietly behind almost every professional sports contract in existence. After Reggie's death, his widow, Donna Harris Lewis, filed a medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Mudge and several other doctors. She argued that the wrong diagnosis and the failure to properly restrict his activity contributed directly to his death. This case did not move quickly. It stretched across years through more than one trial. The first trial ended without a verdict, in a deadlocked jury and a mistrial. During that first trial, Dr. Mudge testified about the alleged July 12th confession we mentioned earlier, using it as part of his defense. Reggie's family strongly disputed that account, and the argument over what really happened in that appointment became a central piece of the legal fight. Over time, other doctors involved in the case were removed through rulings or settlements, leaving Dr. Mudge as the sole remaining defendant heading into a second trial. In that second trial, the judge made an important decision. He ruled that the defense had not presented enough evidence to show that cocaine had actually caused or contributed to Reggie's fatal heart event. One of the defense's own pathology experts could only say that the heart changes were consistent with cocaine, not that cocaine was the confirmed active cause of death. Based on that gap in the evidence, the judge removed the cocaine-related evidence from the jury's consideration entirely. He instructed jurors to set aside any questions about drug use, the Celtics contract, and the insurance policies, and to decide the case purely on the medical standard of care Dr. Mudge had provided. With that narrower focus, the jury reached its verdict. They cleared Dr. Mudge of negligence. Their decision meant they believed his original diagnosis had been a reasonable one, based on the information he had available to him at the time he made it. Massachusetts' appeals court later reviewed the case and upheld that result. It is important to understand exactly what that verdict does and does not mean. It does not prove that every medical decision made along the way was correct. It does not prove that the official explanation for Reggie's death was complete or final. A legal verdict answers a specific, narrow legal question: whether one doctor's care met an acceptable standard at one particular moment. It does not erase the conflicting diagnoses that came before it, and it does not erase the genuine warning signs that had appeared months before Reggie died. The court settled a legal dispute. It did not settle the full story of what happened to Reggie Lewis's heart. Trials like this rarely give grieving families the comfort they are searching for. Donna Harris Lewis went into that courtroom hoping to find real accountability for her husband's death. What she received instead was a narrow legal ruling about the standard of medical care, stripped of the wider context that had shaped every decision along the way. That does not mean the jury was wrong. It simply means that a courtroom is built to answer one specific legal question, not to settle every emotional or medical question a grieving family still carries. It is also worth noting how long this legal process actually took. Years passed between Reggie's death and the final appeals court ruling in 2004. During all of that time, his widow and his children lived with an open legal fight hanging over their grief, forced to relive the worst days of their lives through depositions, expert testimony, and courtroom arguments. Most families never have to process a loss this publicly or this slowly. That drawn-out legal battle is part of why the story never faded quietly into the past, the way most private tragedies eventually do. Every new filing, every new witness, and every new headline kept pulling Reggie's name back into the same painful argument about drugs, insurance, and blame, years after he was gone. So let's finally return to what this story really means. Reggie Lewis did not die suddenly with no warning at all. Months earlier, his body had already given a serious warning, right there on the floor of Boston Garden. 12 respected specialists believed his heart condition could genuinely kill him. Another doctor offered a far more hopeful answer, one that let him keep chasing the life he loved. The official cause of his death was heart damage linked to a healed viral infection. Allegations about cocaine remained disputed for years afterward, and they were never proven to be the actual cause of his death. Questions about money, insurance, and reputation added real pressure behind the scenes. But that pressure does not prove any planned conspiracy. What it does prove is that the simple version of this story, the one many people heard and accepted, left out far too much. The truth was never one clean answer. It was three conflicting medical opinions: a young man desperate for hope, and a family left to fight for answers for years after he was gone. But none of that should be the final word on who Reggie Lewis was. Remember the player who scored 2,708 points at Northeastern, more than anyone in that school's history. Remember the defender who blocked Michael Jordan 4 times in a single game. Remember the captain the entire city of Boston trusted with its future. That is the player so many people saw in him before controversy took over the conversation. Reggie Lewis was a son, a husband, a father-to-be, and a leader who carried an entire franchise on his shoulders while still in his 20s. He deserved better than to spend 3 decades reduced to an argument about drugs and money. His talent was real. His leadership was real. His heart, in every sense of that word, belonged to the game and to the people who loved him. The truth should not erase Reggie Lewis. It should finally bring the player back into view.